I'm probably going to cover a little bit of the same ground, hopefully not very much of the same ground. Oops, did I just hit the wrong button? Yep. How do we get out of that? Escape.
Escape.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, so the question is sprawl killing us? You probably, you all know the issues that have been brought up regarding sprawl, air pollution, pedestrian safety, obesity, of course, and also social isolation. I'll say a little bit about each of these things. I'm just going to show one slide on air pollution because I'm going to give a whole talk on air pollution this afternoon. What I put on this slide is the national average trend in pretty much every pollutant that we measure from the 1970s through 2002 or 2003, depending on what the data are. And I've also put CDC's data on asthma incidents in there too. Now, every kind of pollution we measure, carbon monoxide, ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, they've all gone down, and not just on average, as I'll show this afternoon, they've gone down everywhere. In fact, they've gone down especially in the areas with more pollution, like Southern California, and Houston, and so on. And yet, so we have this anti-correlation between the asthma rate and the air pollution level. Now, I don't think anybody thinks that having less air pollution is bad for asthma. On the other hand, it's just not plausible that the rise in asthma is being caused by air pollution. And yet, in press releases put out by people who should know better, like researchers from the CDC, who are in alliance with environmental groups like Smart Growth America, you see quotes like this: increases in vehicle miles traveled has resulted in an increase in air pollution. And that increase in air pollution has caused an increase in the incidence of respiratory disease. Vehicle miles traveled has gone up by a factor of 2 or more since 1980, and air pollution has gone down by every measure that we have. Okay, more on that later. Okay, this is a pretty similar chart to what Marlene just showed you. This is the Smart Growth America study, which is going to get beat up on a lot this morning. I just marked down three of the counties. This is expected weight of the average person. Once again, same very shallow line based on sprawl index. What I'm going to talk about, though, is that the sprawl index itself is kind of suspect. You can see that the sprawl index spans a range from the lowest sprawling county of about, it's got an index of about 60, to the most sprawling county, to the least sprawling county, which is Manhattan, 350. So that's about a factor of 7 range in the sprawl index. The sprawl index is roughly logarithmic, though. The actual underlying driving force is density, and where the sprawl index goes from a range of 50 to 350, density goes from a few hundred to more than 50,000 per square mile. So when Smart Growth America predicts that turning Atlanta into San Francisco would reduce the weight of the average person by 2.3 pounds, that apparently small change on this sprawl index actually represents a factor of 10 increase in residential density. And also, another thing about the index is that the tail of the index is driven totally by New York City. These top 4, these least sprawling 4 counties are all boroughs of New York City. 4 boroughs except Staten Island, which has high density but much lower density than the other 4 boroughs. And you got San Francisco and a few other northeastern cities like Philadelphia in there. So let's do it based on density instead of based on the sprawl index. So this is the weight of the average person, and this is the predicted average weight from the Smart Growth America study. And now we're looking at it based on density. I put this line here just because there were like 400 counties in the study. I had to punch these in my hand because they didn't put an Excel table on their site. So I didn't do all of them. I did about 100 of them. I did all of the counties that had a density of more than 3,000, which is also a sprawl index of more than about 125. And then I did a kind of a sample, just a random sample of the rest. So you can see, as Marlene showed, that almost everyone is piled up down here at the relatively low densities, and you got a few high density places, including New York City, that are totally driving the results that Smart Growth America is getting in their study. Some other results, and these are just taking the results at face value and saying, say their index is measuring something real and that it has some effect on weight. Even on their own terms, the effect is small. So turning Atlanta into San Francisco would only get a 2.3 pound reduction. It would increase recreational walking by 1 minute per month. All this for a factor of 10 increase in density, which it's ridiculous on its face. It couldn't happen even if everyone agreed that it should happen. If you compare the 25 most sprawling versus 25 least sprawling counties, as Marlene also showed us before, small differences, small change in hypertension rate, 25 versus 23%, and obesity rate. Now, the difference between the 25 most sprawling and the 25 least sprawling counties is about a factor of 20 or more increase in density. So we're seeing extremely tiny changes, even taking their study at face value, for huge changes in residential density. What about pedestrian safety? The claim is that sprawl makes our living arrangements less safe by requiring us to walk across large boulevards and with fast-moving traffic. Now, despite the fact that there has been a large amount of sprawl or what's called suburban development during the last 25 years, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, pedestrian injury rate has actually dropped quite a bit, 50%. This is the rate. It's dropped 50% for adults and 75% for children. Also, another thing that you don't really see talked about is what are the real factors that are causing this. Now, about half of pedestrian fatalities and auto crashes involve alcohol, not the driver or the pedestrian. And in almost a third of the cases, pedestrians have blood alcohol levels of 0.08%. So clearly there's a large alcohol factor. There's a preponderance in rural areas compared to the population in rural areas. They're more likely to have fatalities. So you don't really see much real investigation into what are the real causes of this. Now, it is true that in urbanized areas, the deaths are more likely to be associated with larger boulevards, arterials, also associated with unlit areas at night, and so on. But it also could be that over time people are walking less. Whether that, the causes of that could be just the fact that we've chosen more sedentary lifestyles. Probably not very related to sprawl. We've seen that the sprawl happened before the increase in weight. So if people are walking less, you'd expect to see fewer pedestrian fatalities also. Let's see. Okay. Let's take a look closer at the index in terms of the traffic fatalities. Reed Ewing, who did all this work for Smart Growth America, published a study in a peer-reviewed journal based on the Smart Growth the sprawl index again, and calculated that a 1% increase in the sprawl index results in a 1.5% decrease. An increase in sprawl index is good because that means a more compact community. 1% increase in the sprawl index means a 1.5% decrease in pedestrian fatalities. And this is the chart that's in the paper. I just had to flip it out of the PDF file, so I'm sorry that the graphic is so bad. Now, this is a log plot. So I put in the actual values. You can see that the distance between each increment gets larger and larger, which is basically it's an exponential kind of growth. So this is the traffic death rate from all modes. Walk, pedestrians, people in cars, and so on. This is the sprawl index on this axis. Now, the odd thing about this plot, it's a log plot. Now, the sprawl index itself is essentially already the logarithm of density, close to the logarithm of density, and then they've taken again the log of that. So it's almost like they've taken the logarithm twice. So they've compressed the horizontal axis even more. But you can see here that once again the New York counties are driving the tail at this end, and a bunch of very low density counties. These are counties with a population density of a few hundred are driving this end. You can see that. Now what I did, I just took the data from their paper. They specifically provided specific data for only about 12 or 13 counties at the low end, the most sprawling, and at the high end, the least sprawling in the index. I plotted against density again, so you can see the full scale of what's going on here. This is the all-in fatality rate, and in these what must be largely rural counties because they have overall population densities of just a few hundred, you have this huge range, but nevertheless very high pedestrian fatality rates in these rural areas. Then in the 4 New York City boroughs, you have these relatively low rates at very high population densities. I'd like to get my hands on the data for what they did for what they find in here, probably they all fall into a block like this in here. And if you just remove these outliers, the very, very low density rural counties, and the 4 very high density New York counties, very likely you just have a blob where the correlation is virtually 0 between density and pedestrian fatality rates, which suggests once again that their index is simply not a real measure of what's going on in urban areas. Now, if you go back to the real world and ask, has anyone tried to research who's healthier, who's actually healthier in urbanized areas, suburban areas, rural areas? There aren't a lot of studies of that, but there is one cohort study, which is a nice way to do it because they had a few thousand people in different parts of the country. They followed them over an 8-year period, and they had a lot of information about them at entry into the study: income, educational attainment, race, marital status, and so on, in addition to where they live. And so they were able to control for all those things when they went back 8 years later and said how many of these people had actually died. And they found that city dwellers were actually 40% more likely to die than suburbanites, even after controlling for income, marital status, all the things that race, all the things that you think might affect health, and that might be unrelated to where people live. City dwellers were also 27% more likely to be in the lowest quintile of physical activity level. Now they did find one thing that they were lost to explain, which is that suburban blacks actually had about the same mortality risk as the average city dweller. And they, like I said, they control for all the important things you should control for when you want to sort out the effects of living, the place you live versus all the other things about your life. Also, even though a few CDC researchers have jumped on the smart growth bandwagon, the CDC's own report, Health United States 2001, reported that suburban women are the least likely to be obese among different groups of people. So I think Ron brought up Ed Glazer. Ed Glazer at Harvard and Matt Kahn at Tufts did a econometric study of sprawl, and they looked at a whole bunch of different factors about sprawl. Sprawling cities have shorter commutes, as Wendell has talked about quite a bit. In fact, the commute penalty for higher density, the longer time, the increase in time it takes to commute to work is actually greater for transit as density increases than it is for the automobile as density increases. They found that sprawling cities are less segregated than denser cities. As I'll talk about this afternoon, technology is solving automobile pollution without the need to restrict the way people live, work, and travel. Of course, despite everyone complaining about the cost of automobiles and the smart growth movement, overall people adopt the automobile because it ultimately reduces the cost of doing all the things that are important in their life. They sort of put the cart before the horse. That the car is expensive, therefore we shouldn't use it. People choose the car even though it's expensive because it provides so many kinds of benefits that people find important in their lives. As far as the social isolation, they say that time study diaries show that people in suburban areas are about as involved in all sorts of social things as people in urbanized areas. And they also point out the political risks of the risks of political control of the way people live their lives, and talk about the evidence that homeowners are actually using zoning not to reduce externalities, but to restrict supply and drive up their home values. I think the way that economists approach these issues of human welfare compared to the way activists or public health experts like people at the CDC who jumped on this bandwagon, I think the difference in the way that they approach these issues just sort of points out the difference in the vision of human welfare between both people in the smart growth movement and probably most of the people at this conference, the way economists think about human welfare versus the way people with what Tom Sowell calls the vision of the anointed think about human welfare. That with the public health community, we're the experts. Why are you living this way? It's obviously bad for you. If you only do things our way, you'd be a lot happier and better off. Whereas economists look at the way people behave and say, what's in it for them that they're living this way? Let me go find out why they're living this way. What incentives do they face? What are their goals? What are their values? Sort of thinking about it from the individual's point of view rather than from the expert telling you what to do, to go and actually find out what's important to you and why you made these choices. And in his book, The Vision of the Anointed Soul, talks about the sort of expertocracy, if you want to call it that, kind of natty perspective of urban policy that people are making foolish choices, and it's our job to go in and show these benighted masses the way they're supposed to really be living their lives, and favoring course of directives. I think it's a very patronizing view of people, and I think also it ignores people's aspirations from their own point of view, instead of substituting imposition of someone else's, some third party's view of the good life on other people and overriding those individual choices. I kind of think that almost economists are the real public health experts because they're thinking about human welfare writ large. What really makes our lives better, and who's in the best position to make the decisions about what's going to make our lives better? Some third party who doesn't bear any of the cost or benefits of those decisions, or the person who's actually living a life and has to live with the decisions that he or she makes. And one of my favorite quotes from Adam Smith, I think he must have been thinking about the smart growth movement when he said it 200 and some odd years ago, that the virtuous sometimes will stop at nothing to show us the way. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, sure. Where do the health experts live? Because I was surprised to find, I work at UC Berkeley and never met Peter Calthorpe, but I talked to students who have been to his house for planning sessions and that sort of thing, and they're always surprised that he lives in a single-family detached home in Berkeley somewhere. I mean, he keeps it private, understandably, and they're surprised because they expect that they're going to one of his developments and be overshot somewhere. And in actual fact, they go to in Berkeley is, because of the age it was, is relatively high density, but it's still a single-family home, no one in transit. And it was kind of like, well, what's going on? The same is true with Professor Severo, who's written quite a bit of stuff. He apparently lives in this suburban home in Lafayette, which he moved to when he had children, is what I'm told. It's still I'm told. And is now ferrying his children around by car, like most people do, so that they're saying one thing and doing completely different.
I live in Sacramento, which is near the Bay Area, and I have a lot of friends in the Bay Area. Yeah. And I get into this argument with them a lot that they're against school choice and school vouchers, but they've all specifically moved to areas with good schools, in order to have good schools for their kids, but they want to deny that ability of people who are too poor to do that, right? To do the same for their children.
And I have a feeling that if you look at some of the health experts, they probably live in suburban neighborhoods in nice homes and
well, the CDC is in Atlanta too.
Anyway.
Part of this is being hypocritical in a tasteful sort of way.
Yeah.
Wendell's hectored by this fellow Joel Hirschhorn, who's dedicated his career to being sort of one-man truth squad on Wendell and Smart Growth, also admits that he lives in the suburbs, but he lives in a tasteful suburb, an older suburb, a closer-in suburb. So there are various degrees of sinning.
I should point out, by the way, that I've never lived in a suburb. I grew up in New York City, and I live in downtown Sacramento.
And Randall writes most places, whereas John Figuerosi, who just did, he lives in a suburban home here in Portland, admits he does. Not in his presentation, but and at all our meetings, which we held in our county, Contra Costa County, which Figuerosi Calthorpe was adjusting the county of the Smart Growth, we held it next to a BART station, and the only person who ever came was a woman who couldn't drive, came on BART. Okay, which is really good we had it there, but John Figuerosi and the other Calthorpe employees always drove. It was just like, I mean, it was wonderful to hit him with that. Anyway,
So, the Center for Disease Control obviously has jumped into this now. The first round, I understood that there was some real pain because some of the CDC staffers have participated, but not CDC.
Yeah.
And that but they put their name with the name of CDC on the cover of these reports.
Yes.
And got blasted. But, and the real question is, what is the internal interest and play within CDC? Of all the things that matter.
It's always X of CDC, it's never CDC.
But they
Which
never,
is,
they never went out of the way to clarify that. I think, and I think it's deliberate, and I'll tell you why. All of these places are subject to congressional appropriations and authorizations. And to maintain and grow your appropriation, you need to be current and topical. There is not a department in the federal government that does not have some smart growth anti-sprawl program. Whether it's Department of Interior, Department of Transportation, HHS, EPA, Department of Interior, they all now have a formal smart growth anti-sprawl program. And part of that is that when they go up and shop their appropriations and budgets around the capital and around the county, they want to look relevant. And so you have a perfect case of Mission Creek, and CDC suddenly sees an opportunity to be very hip and current and dealing with something that's on the front pages of most of the major dairies, and doesn't really mind the fact that there's been that misrepresentation because they view the upside of that to be potentially more money to do more studies and hire more researchers.
Do you know if the health of the inner city population being worse than suburbanites is driven mainly just because of the minority population having poor health?
Well,
poor eating habits and all that stuff.
I mean, the researchers had, first of all, they were able to disaggregate by race, and they found the same thing.
They did find.
And also, when they did their statistical analysis, they actually controlled for race and income and education and health status and entry, and they still have this residual effect of where you live. Now, they only had about 3,000 some odd people. As far as I know, no one's used any larger cohort to try to assess these issues. Although I think those kinds of cohorts do exist with tens of thousands of people where you could.
So when you separated white population in the city and white population in suburbs, it was still worse in the city.
If we just took out all the Madison Avenue models, Manhattan and stuff, change the whole
Yeah, that's right.
trend line.
yeah.
I think this is part of the problem with Smart Growth America's approach, that they create this county index, or they create a metropolitan area index, and there's just a huge amount of heterogeneity in most metropolitan areas. I think one aspect of the face validity of the index is that everyone complains about California being like a car culture and the most sprawling. Well, Smart Growth America's index, California is the least sprawling state overall. County for county, California has higher sprawl indices, well over 100 than other states. And yet, you've got a place like Los Angeles or San Bernardino or Riverside where almost all trips are taken by car.